computer.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to this today. We are recording, and I'm talking to Abigail Glaum-Lathbury. And I wanted to talk to Abigail today because she is part of this group called the Arts Research Collective that is offering this really cool class series. And so I just love to talking to Abigail because she's got such great ideas about clothing. I mean, clothing is important. I love hearing you talk about why it is important and why we actually need to think about it. So rather than have me introduce you, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Sure. Also, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was fun. We had a little pre-chat beforehand, but also I just like seeing you and talking with you. So yeah, the feeling is very mutual. So I'm Abigail Glaum-Lathbury. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a designer based here in Chicago. I teach pattern making and fashion design, primarily at the School of the Art Institute. But I have a couple of projects. So I'm an artist and fashion designer. So fashion designer, oh, I don't know. I hate labels. It's like the worst, you know?
You got to pick some though. That's how people know who you are.
No, I hate it. Do I have to? Also, I have like something stuck in my teeth. Okay. Yeah, I'm a pattern maker, fashion designer, / artist. The practice that I have, I characterize as a counter practice. That means that I'm very much working within like industrial systems. Like I'm a trained pattern maker and fashion designer. But I'm also looking to explore and or deliver things that are not quite within that sort of set parameters. So we think about the fashion industry as being like, you know, volume and production oriented. And I'm more interested in like the politics and like the economics of it and sort of like a systemic understanding. Which I should also say, like I'm able to explore because of the economic reality that I'm in, which is that I teach, and so I'm not financially dependent on the thing that I'm actually critiquing, and a lot of my work is very much critique based. So the two projects, for the most part, that I'm going to be talking about today are the Arts Research Collective, which is an alternative school that I have created with two friends of mine. So it's tri-coastal. So we have one collaborator who's based in Los Angeles, and then the other one who's based in New York and New Jersey. So it's Cameron Crawford, who's our East Coast branch, and then there's Maura Brewer, who's our West Coast branch, and then there's me, who is our Third Coast branch, / Chicago.
So can you tell me a little bit about the Arts Research Collective? I mean, well, you have two choices. There are these two groups, the Rational Dress Society and the Arts Research Collective, and they overlap, and one came first. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the Arts Research Collective is it's an alternative university, and it was like most projects, right? Like most people, like everybody has sort of overlapping interests, and so Maura, the Los Angeles branch, and I started a project about 6 years ago, I think now at this point, which kind of blows my mind, called the Rational Dress Society, where we make a single garment called just jumpsuit, no article. So jumpsuit, it's designed to replace all clothing in perpetuity. It used to come in 248 sizes, but we have since expanded. And so now I think it's close to 306 or something in that.
And you go to the jumpsuit website and you just sort of pick like your height and your weight, I think, and whether you want a male fit or a female fit, kind of like there's a version with darts in it. Right?
Yeah, it's a version with darts, although we use ungendered language to talk about so that it doesn't subscribe to a binary. So we have 6 different base body types. So like that's where the technical pattern making comes in, right? So like, you know, I've developed this whole sizing system that ideally is sort of something in the ballpark of like mass customization. Or that you could have a system that actually catches like a wide number of people. So
it's fun though, because you put in your parameters and then you get, you guys tell me what my size is, and it's a name.
Yes.
It's not a number or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't remember what my size is anymore. I did download the pattern. I've never made it.
Nice. Yeah. So then our patterns are all available to download for free. I occasionally we make the garment, although Holly and I were just talking about things that we like and don't like about the industry, and I hate production. I have like an allergic reaction, I like break out in hives. I hate it. I can do it. I really don't like to. So sometimes we sell the garments. For the most part, we do not. But more importantly, that it's a teaching project. So partly it's teaching how to sew, but there's the second half of it, which is where I think a lot of my practice lies, which is that it's interested in like the larger systems that are related to fashion. So that's the jumpsuit project. And so the Arts Research Collective is more of a broad school. So the jumpsuit project was, I don't know, born out of some pretty dire economic circumstances, actually, and like general frustration. Like Maura and I were both trying to figure out like how do we live in this world? How do we I don't know, how do we do this? Like how do we do this better? How do we live better? How do we actually get the things that we want? And I'm not talking about like a Ferrari or anything. I'm just talking about like not having to pawn things so that you can make rent.
Right.
Like basic, or like how do you not exploit labor?
So it was born out of like you guys needed to make money, but you also wanted to be ethical about it, basically. Is that
kind of? I mean, it was born out of like, if the thing that we're doing doesn't make any sense, like it's not logical, like what happens if we make a utopian thing? Like what happens? Like what is a different way of doing this? Sort of like not necessarily accepting the thing that's handed to us, right? Like the industry as it is.
Doing this being a clothing designer, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's an alternative way to be a clothing designer.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like an artist, or like a producer of any kind, or just like an alternative way of being like a human in the world, right? Without, I don't know, participating in some of these systems that are like really abusive and punishing.
All right. So let's go back to your founding the Rational Door Society. That's a done deal. You started that. And then when did the Arts Research Collective come about?
So the Arts Research Collective was born sort of more as a specifically art project, although it has rapidly been morphing into an alternative fashion school. So the Arts Research Collective, the way that I would tie them together is that there's theory and practice, which is essentially the thing that the Arts Research Collective is most interested in exploring and also teaching. So we just finished teaching the jumpsuit class. So it was jumpsuit, how to make a personal uniform for the end of capitalism. And so of course we're teaching commodity fetishism. We talked about gender with Judith Butler. What else did we teach? The Cyborg Manifesto with Donna Haraway. So sort of thinking about like the past, the present, and the future, right? And using like theoretical terms and language to like, again, imagine a different future, or like imagine a different way to do things at the same time where you're learning like a technical skill. And so the technical skill that we were teaching during jumpsuit, like the technical material skill, right, is actually the sewing, while simultaneously learning which I would also sort of argue is a technical skill, like actually being able to like analyze something. So to be able to understand like signs and signifiers, like semiotics, commodity fetishism, right?
Right. So we're not jumping ahead, but it is very complicated for me. So I'm going to say to you guys, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, because this is so like rich in information. So this is what I loved about the class idea that you guys were doing, both jumpsuit and the one that's coming up, work coat, is that you're combining this technical physical skills of pattern making and sewing and cutting and everything else with the philosophy or the political science. Sure. Or the sociology of it. And so how do those things work together? Like, how do you teach both in a class?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is well, I'm going to give you two answers. The technical answer is that first we start with like the sewing demonstration or the pattern making demonstration. That's the first half of class. And then the second half of class is the theory. And so like functionally how that works, just if I can take a step back and talk about it in terms of like the organization of the curriculum, like what it is that's being delivered. Like, so you start with like a discrete project. So the next class is the work coat, which is like literally hot off the press. Like I just,
if you are modeling, that's yours.
Yeah, which I'm modeling. It's got some nice red stitching. Like this is the next class we're making. I'm also wearing the jumpsuit, so that's the other thing that we made. So like there will be a discrete project, and then within that you break it down just like you would in any class. Like what are the steps, what are the different principles? So are we talking about pattern making? If we're talking about pattern making, then sort of like breaking down some of the indicators on the language of technical pattern making, right? Because it is a language. And then, so that's sort of like, that kind of forms the spine of it. And then there's the second part. So it's kind of like a helix structure, where the two things kind of warp around one another. So we might talk about then like, well, what are we analyzing on a day? So for the work code, a lot of the theory that we're going to be reading is about like bodies, and signs, right? And like signifiers. So we have a whole section on visibility and hypervisibility, which is of course like so foundational, to clothing. But we'll also talk about it in terms of like facial recognition scrambling, for example, right? So if you have a retroreflective material, if a flash goes off, it is both hypervisible, but also renders you invisible, because you cannot, like the camera cannot recognize you as like the human that you are. And so we'll talk, so we might talk about like what material you might choose. So maybe you need a wool or a cotton, which feels like a very practical decision, which it is, right? Like depends on where you're living. And we have people taking these classes like all over the world. There's a whole bunch of, we have a bunch of ARC comrades in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Germany. They're like Ireland. It's like everybody's all over the place. It's awesome. But then at the same time, we're going to be talking about like, well, what is the history of cotton, or like what does it suggest, or what does the history of a work coat mean? And so essentially, it's to position a garment and a technical skill within like a broader context of like political economy, material, and also history. So it's the clothing in a way becomes secondary. So like we're making a work coat, but it's not really about the work coat, right?
Okay, so what would you say to somebody who really just wants to learn to make a coat?
Oh, they can make a coat. We do that too. I mean, like we do that.
Yeah.
It's it's a yes and, right?
Yeah.
So it's the level of engagement is 100% up to the participants. Which I should also say, it's really important for us at ARC to have, so these the jumpsuit class had, I think it was like 360 participants in it, and it was only $50 a student. So we did have to raise the price a little bit because we're offering live ASL interpreting, which I'm super excited about. I know.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do the nuts and bolts here for a quick second. The class that you're offering now that is starting August 25th is called Work Coat, How to Stay Warm in the Ashes of Empire. It is how many weeks long?
It's 6 weeks, 12 classes. So it's 5 weeks,
2 classes a week, and $60 with sign language interpreting. And I'm going to guess, based on the content, that like you could, if you missed a class, you'd still be able to come to the future classes. And
oh, actually, no. All of them are designed to be taken synchronously or asynchronously, which is how we have comrades like all over the world. So all of our classes are recorded, and then we use something called Discord. And Discord, you may be familiar with it's like a gaming chat platform. But we're using it as like a community forum. So if you've ever used like Slack, it's very similar to Slack, or like almost, you could even kind of, it's similar to Reddit in a way, but it's private, so it's invitation only. So if you're registered in the class, then you get an invitation to the Discord server. And one of the things that's super interesting about the class that we just ran is like literally overnight, as everybody started, working in the Discord, like this immediate community popped up. And so if somebody had a question about, I don't know, the finishing a hem or something, somebody would type it into the Discord, and then maybe somebody in New Zealand would answer the question, or they might say, oh, I had the same problem, you should try this other thing, It was incredible. Like the way that the community held itself and supported one another was not something that I was anticipating, and something that I was 100% blown away by. It was beautiful.
Do you feel like, I mean, I know that you've always sort of felt this connection between clothing and politics, and of course, anybody who works in, a lot of people feel that, I think, even if we can't articulate it as well as you do. But do you feel like this current pandemic and political situation has sort of increased the either the need for this or people's understanding of it, or how do you think it's affected what you do, I guess?
Profoundly so. So on so many levels, actually, right? So ARC originally, we were planning to run a 6-week intensive in-person class in New York City over the summer. And then of course, just like everybody, it was like everything got canceled. And so initially we all had this meeting where we were like, oh shit, like, what do we do? We have all these like great plans to run this thing, but obviously that's not going to be possible. But what was so interesting is that like at the same time, like everybody was at home and everybody was making PPE. Which was incredible, right? Like all of a sudden it was just like the crafting world like mobilized, and are still mobilized, right? Like, good luck finding a sewing machine right now. Everybody started like making sourdough and sewing, like at the same time. So it changed the trajectory of ARC, and even thinking about like economic models, and like it's like the transparency is something that's like foundational to like every part of the project, of both Rational Dress Society and also ARC. And so what we realized was like, wow, this is kind of interesting, like rather than saying everything quit, we have to quit, don't be whatever, that's too bad. But instead it was like, well, if everybody's online anyway and everybody's sewing anyway, what happens if we teach this jumpsuit class in a way that we've never been able to have it? So we usually, in the past when we've taught the class, it's a 2-day long workshop. The first day is really fun, so fun. And the second day is like punishing and terrible because everybody's like, I gotta get it done, and it's hard. It's a hard garment. It's a lot. It's like ambitious. It has a fly, like there's stitching in the ditch. I mean, it's like, right. It's a lot. And so we were like, well, we've never been able to teach this class. One, that also pairs it with the theory, which is the foundation of the project. And two, over like an extended period of time so that people actually are able to like learn and enjoy themselves, Right. And so we started this other sort of way of thinking about it. And we were like, well, if we offer the classes at a very, very low price, then it's also a different type of educational model, right? That like, you don't, like, the barrier for entry is lowered. So like you don't have to necessarily spend $50,000 a year on like a fine art or a fashion design education to be able to have access, even if it's on like an introductory level.
Right.
Like you don't, maybe it's something that you're curious about, or maybe it's something that you didn't know you were curious about, but this sort of gives that opportunity.
I think one thing that's so appealing about this class is that I feel like a lot of people want to learn how to make their own patterns. And so I know you're going to be addressing that. Can you, and without giving the class away, can you talk a little bit about like what kind of skills you need to take the class, what you need to come in with, and like sort of how you're going to teach that?
Yeah. You need no skills. I mean, bonus, it'll be easier if you have them, but like technically you do not need them. So the work coat class, I am like so excited about the work coat class. So I'm going to talk to you about my portion, which is the design portion. So design pattern making. So we're within jumpsuit, so we're also thinking about these as being like courses that are related or connected. So we're talking about sartorial solidarity, right? And fashion sovereignty. And so like, how could you outfit yourself for the coming revolution, right? And so if in the jumpsuit class you start out with a pattern that already exists, which does come in like, whatever, 300 some sizes, but still doesn't actually fit all bodies, like it just doesn't. And it never will, right? Because we're not interchangeable parts. Like I'm not a size of bolt, right? Like I'm a human being. And depending on how many sandwiches I have in a given week, like I change, right? Like we all change. And so like there is really no such thing as like a standardized size. And so if the jumpsuit class really started out with being a sewing class, then the work coat class really talks explicitly about like making things for your own body. And so we're making body doubles. So I'm teaching not one, but two different ways that you can make a form. And I've got, here she is. This is my lady. This is who I usually work on. And she is gendered, right? I'm using sort of gendered terms here. But she's also
but most of us are not a dress form size, so you are a little bit lucky in that regard.
Yeah, right? Like I'm shorty McShorty pants, and like, she's like way the hell taller than me. Her like boobs are bigger than mine. Like we just have we have different bodies, right? So I'm going to be teaching two different ways to create your own body form. And I'm excited about, well, I'm not going to get too into it, but there's, the two different methods also have different politics, which we'll talk about in class 1.
Of course they do.
I know, because, why not? So we'll be making our very own body forms. And then after that, I'm actually going to be teaching the technical skills of draping. And so draping is when you actually build straight onto the dress form versus pattern drafting, which is done flat, and it's done through rulers and measurements. And ultimately, they both end up as garments, but the approach is really, really radically different. And I wanted to start with draping because
it's so much easier to see what you're doing. It's much easier to see what your outcome is going to be as you're doing it.
Exactly. Like it's really easy, right? Like you can tell right away, like that pleat is ugly, right? And then you do it again. Or like, yeah, that looks right. So we're draping, and then I'm going to walk you through the language of actually like making the pattern, truing the pattern. We are going to be drafting a sleeve. My favorite demo to give is on cap height, like range of movement and cap height. I think it's like I really bro down with the sleeve.
Maybe I'll come for that class.
Oh my god, it's so fun. I love it. I've got some like good tricks up the sleeve. Pun intended, I guess. So anyway, there's a whole sleeve demo, and then we actually sew it. So we start like the beginning, the first draft of the pattern, the second draft of the pattern, analyzing fit, and also talking about like desire, right? Desire and need. Like, what do you want the thing to look like? Maybe it needs to be sequins. Maybe you want your like Bill Cunningham style French worker's jacket. It's up to you, right? Like that's desire. And then need, does it need to keep you warm? Maybe not. Like what is it signaling? How might one material suggest one thing and another material might suggest another thing? And then there's actually the technical skill of putting, like piecing the thing together. And what I liked about the jumpsuit class is that we started out with the jumpsuit, and then I moved into how to knock off a pattern. So stealing.
That's a seriously good skill to have.
I agree, which is funny.
We all have clothes in our closets that we love and we'd like to duplicate, and no one's going to do that for you.
No, they are not. No, it's not. So like,
can't pay people to do that for you.
Yeah. So, it's also like, that's about autonomy, like, and not feeling like you need to be dependent on, like this. I mean, like, you're all here we're talking like, this is like a fair trade. These are fair trade people, right? Like, you all know that like, it's not all clothes are made equally, right?
Right.
Like they're not, or at least they're not, like the labor is not compensated equally.
Right. Well, one thing I like so much about people who do want to learn to sew and make patterns, you know, myself included, is that it really gives you an appreciation for the process and what you're paying for, you know, and why this is an important subject, and
Yep.
why it matters that garment workers are mistreated and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly.
But what I was going to say was, so people do need to know how to use a sewing machine to take this class.
No.
Okay.
Nope. No. And actually, I was starting to feel a little guilty, like, you know, real talk, because I was finishing sewing the work coat, and the work coat is so much easier to put together than the jumpsuit. And I was like, oh shit, you know, maybe we should have started with the work coat instead of the jumpsuit. But
you mean like this? So it's fewer steps, right? Because there's no pants.
The stitching is just so much less complicated. Yeah.
You were talking about putting hand worked buttonholes on your jacket, or is that something that is like varies by, like, each individual can choose to do what they like as far as their trims? Okay.
Yeah, and also like maybe also snaps, you know, like which would get into questions of like ability. You know, like maybe like if like arthritis might be a problem for you, right? Like, or it might be something that troubles you, in which case like your need would be snaps. Or maybe you are quite busty, and you always have a gap, right? Because the buttons are in the wrong place. You know, like that is a space where it's like feels like a small gesture, but it's also, it's custom for you. Maybe you want it long, maybe you want it short.
And do people have to acquire materials before the class starts?
Yes and no. I mean, in an effort, ideally, right? But you know, everything is also sort of complicated right now. So we have a whole FAQ, so our frequently asked questions for the class, which does talk about alternatives. So there are two different types of body forms that initially we're going to be making, and we try to be really explicit about like which one, like why you might want one or why you might want another one, and also like different types of material. So you could technically, right, wheel around again, make it out of like a heavy canvas, but also like maybe you have a bed sheet that has holes in it or something, like use that. It doesn't matter, right? Like it's not about the idea is to like make it possible to enter wherever it is that anybody.
The barrier to entry is very low, and people can probably email you questions, like read the FAQ and before if they have any questions about it. Okay, one more question for me, and then I'm going to open it up and see if anybody has any questions. Can you talk a little bit about Cameron and that part of the class and what he's going to do?
Yeah. So Cameron is dazzling. So the idea with the classes is that we start out with the technical and then we move into the theoretical, which sort of takes a page out of Cuban factories, where they'll have like a reader within the factory who's like reading, and so you're also like you're simultaneously working and also like intellectually stimulated. So the same idea is sort of found here. And so Cameron is going to be giving lectures on, he's talking about visibility and hypervisibility, wrappers, like how we're wrapping the body, why it is that we're wrapping the body, semiotics, which is the study of signs, and language, and like, you know, words. Oh my God. But what is the language? How does the language develop around both bodies and clothing? And uniformity, right? And like compliance or non-compliance. And so essentially every week we have a reading. Sometimes there are two, typically there's one. They are all able to be found online. We did sort of jump through some legal hurdles on that, because as you may know, you can't just like scan a book
right
and post it.
Right.
So we do.
So you had to find readings from things that were already publicly available. Is that what you're trying to say?
Basically, yeah.
Right.
So all of the readings are available before class, and so ideally, you know, and the level of engagement is again like up to the student. So you can take the class and not stitch anything, or you can take the class and not read anything, right? It doesn't matter, you know, or maybe you're doing both, right? And there is no priority. It's okay. Any of those options is totally fine. So every week there's the reading, and then it gets broken down through that. So actually, if you don't mind, can I play our promo video?
Oh yes, there's a little promo video that's very short and entertaining. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna play this real quick. Hopefully it does a better job. Does my screen share?
Yes.
Great. All right.
I hope that's original music.
It is. It absolutely is. Yes, it's from a performance that we did.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I thought I would invite you guys if you want to unmute yourselves and ask questions.
Yeah, hopefully it's clear. There's a lot of information. We have the ARC, Rational Dress Society.
Yeah, I did share the links there, obviously, for Jumpsuit and for the Arts Research Collective. So, and I know this is sort of all presented in no particular order, but I hope you guys got something out of it. Is anybody, what do you guys think is anybody going to sign up? Is anybody going to look at it further? I'm kind of like thinking maybe I should sign up now.
It should be fun. I mean, I'm excited particularly about the body form and talking about like representation. Like this is something that we always talk about at the university where I teach, our students are continually asking, they're like, yeah, but we only have like these like little skinny bitches.
Yeah.
Like, is there not another way, And so I think I'm excited to talk about, I'm particularly excited to talk about that and being able to make our own bodies.
It's funny, as somebody who works in the clothing industry and is also a pattern maker, I feel like that's like the number one thing that we could actually solve as an industry is like fitting all the bodies, and people are so resistant to doing it.
I know. Well, it's because it's
very frustrating.
It is frustrating, but it's because it's cheaper.
Yeah. Right.
It's cheaper. So like the fewer, like within industrial cutting, I mean, like, right?
Yeah.
If you'll cut a whole stack of something, you cut it once, it's much cheaper. Versus having to cut things individually. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah. So many decisions are driven by money. I mean, really all of them are driven by money. But we also have all this technology now. It just seems like something should be able to become, it seems like somebody should be able to make it profitable to do these things that we really need to do to be more human.
Yeah, or demand it even, like us, I think about like this is something we talk about a lot during when we give our jumpsuit lectures. It's just like the number of square footage of closet space in the US has like tripled or something, right? Like if you look at a floor plan from a house from 1920, it has a radically different relationship to closet space than does a floor plan from a house from 2018, 2019. We have a closet industry, right? Like there's like organization, like we have something called the Container Store, which is horrifying. But we have all these huge closet spaces, and yet we hate all of our clothes. Or you like got dressed in the morning, or you go to get dressed in the morning, and you're like, oh, I have nothing to wear. You have like, I don't know, endless options, and yet everything is terrible. And so like, what happens if you change? Like, what happens if you change your relationship to it? Right? And make something for yourself.
I just have another question. Are you guys going to are you going to offer more classes after Work Coat? Can you tell us about anything that you have in the works, or?
We're going to do underwear.
Yay!
I know. It should be very exciting. Yeah. Reform underwear.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess
I'm excited to join.
Yay! Are you going to come?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
It's really, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I saw you in the Fair Trade Fashion Revolution 2019 panel, and I've known Jamie for a while too, and so Jamie told me that you'd be doing this and that you had the jumpsuit class. So
yeah, it should be fun. I'm glad. Thank you for joining. I'm glad also. I felt like I was very crabby on that panel, so hopefully I wasn't. You came back, so maybe I wasn't too crabby.
I also just want to make it clear, Chicago Fair Trade is not getting any kickbacks from you guys or anything like that. I just thought it sounded like a really cool project and very community-minded and education-minded and all that stuff. So
yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you all for coming. Yeah.
Thanks for everyone for coming and for bearing with our technical insanity here. Thanks for recording it, Abigail. And I want to plug our Ethical Closet Tour that's coming up on Friday. That's another free Zoom event. And if you go to the CFT website, chicagofairtrade.org, there's a great description of it that tells you more about the person whose closet we're touring, which I can't remember right now. But she like reworks old pieces and stuff like that. So it should be cool. And Chicago Fair Trade has a bunch of other events coming up too. There's a bunch of picnics in parks so that we can actually see each other in person. And I know there's more than that coming up. So check out the website. I would say that would be my first point of reference. And then, also you can follow both of our Instagram accounts if you want to do that, or Facebook accounts. Well, thanks you guys. Have a great rest of your week. And maybe I'll see some of you in the class.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I hope to see you also.